Hi guys, you again with Committed. Today we have Victor Sokolovskiy in studio and Miriam.
Hello.
Today we have a very special guest, one of the usability pioneers. Please meet Rolf Molich. Rolf, how are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you, talking about one of my favorite topics, usability.
Let's start from the simple question. Your company has name DialogDesign, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Is usability still about dialogue design?
Yes. Well, let me start by saying that my company is called DialogDesign. The funny thing is we rarely design dialogues. It should really be called dialogue testing, because that's what I do most of the time. Actually, today, most of what I do is writing about usability and doing certification courses, like training designers to become more aware of usability. But I would say yes, dialogue design these days is getting more and more complex. Fortunately, usability is getting traction. So more and more people are aware of the importance of usability, which is good, because otherwise the complexity of the modern dialogues would simply kill us. No one would be able to get anything done, which is what Jacob Nielsen, my colleague and friend, predicted about 20 years ago. Fortunately, he was wrong. The internet has not come to a standstill because usability has improved at the same time as the complexity of the various things we're working on. But usability is in fact everywhere. It's not just on websites. Imagine that you have to get a ticket from a ticket machine before you go on the railway, or you have to get a ticket before you can get your car out of the parking house. You probably all know that there can be problems with that. If the machine does not work the way that you wanted it.
Oh, okay. Can you explain what major changes the profession had from the start, I suppose 40 years ago till nowadays?
Well, I became active in usability about 40 years ago. And I must say, most of the things we're doing today, we already did at that time. Like, we talked to users, we did usability testing, we did a few inspections, and so on. But of course, in the 40 years that have passed, we have learned how to do these things a lot better. For a start, we had descriptions of a few pages of how to do a usability test. And here on my bookshelf, I have books of 500 pages, and I have several of them that all describe in great detail how to do a usability test. And I must say, despite these books, despite all the training that I do, we still see some lousy usability testing done. The good thing about usability testing is that even if you do not do it completely correctly, it still gives helpful results. It's a very robust method. And just to make sure, with the usability test, in case not everyone knows what it is, the recipe for usability test is that you get a user, you create a few tasks, and you ask the user to solve these tasks using the product. And then you observe what happens. And you get ready to be surprised, because you most certainly will be surprised by the very logical and very unexpected things that users do.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have a related question about the design. What do you think, at what level, and at what level is the design or usability now in relation to its ideal picture? In your opinion, where will it move?
Oh, it really depends on what the ideal picture is. And that's actually one of the things that I'm researching right now. On Monday, together with some other people, we will be storytellers, saying, let's assume that we have an ideal company that has reached usability heaven. What would life look like in that company? The idea is, of course, to inspire UX professionals, to give them a goal that they can strive towards by telling them what would usability heaven look like. Because I don't know. Well, I have a few suggestions. I've written a scenario for that, and I'm very, very interested to see what my highly qualified colleagues come up with. So that's one of the things that I'm working on right now. About 2 years ago, I did a different exercise. We wrote scenarios for a company that was at the very bottom of what we call the UX maturity scale. That is, people were hostile towards usability. You got remarks like programmers saying, real cowboy programmers don't need no stinking usability. And then we wrote a story about what you could do in order to move that company up the usability maturity ladder. But otherwise, I would say the basic recipe is testing, testing, testing. Testing, usability testing, is the most important tool we have for finding problems, and not just to find problems, but also to demonstrate to our coworkers, hey, even our program has usability problems. So wouldn't it be a good idea next time, instead of finding the usability problems late in the cycle, to find them early by talking to users, maybe, interviewing users, writing a few user requirements, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. And you mentioned storytelling. What did you mean?
Storytelling, that is kind of, are you familiar with the concept of a scenario?
Sure.
We talk about scenarios, and we talk about personas in user experience work, in usability work. A scenario is a story about what could happen. So I believe that good UXers are also good storytellers, because they need to write down scenarios, imagine the future, if you wish, and describe that for a current system, or in this case, what life would look like in UX heaven, or how a certain person, let's call her Janet, actually managed to move her company from one of the low levels of UX maturity to at least get some regular funding for usability in her company.
Thank you.
Rolf, can you give us several, I would say, classical examples of the usability problems? And after that, please describe what actually was the result of such problems. I would say money loss, customers leaving, and things like that.
Well, yes, I can. There are plenty of them. I write reports that are full of descriptions of usability problems ever so often. Let me give you a very simple example. Imagine that you have a car rental website. It's usually quite easy to rent a car on a car rental website, but it's also a valid task to cancel a reservation. Now, if you can't cancel a reservation on a car rental website, that is an example of a usability problem. Or if you can cancel it, but some marketing guy decided that it has to be very difficult for the users to find that. They have to click in 7 different places and follow a track that no one can imagine before they can actually cancel it. Then the website is unusable too. Or you can imagine a website that's very slow in responding. That's another usability problem. The first two are related to what we call effectiveness. Can it do what I want it to do? The second one, about the slow response time, is related to what we call efficiency. Can it do what I want it to do real fast? And then there is an important issue, of course, and that is, does a website look good and attractive? And that's the third dimension of usability, satisfaction. So essentially, we break down usability in three components: effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction, which gives me an opportunity to advertise my website a little bit. I just modified my website recently, and for any people who are looking on this, including you, go to my website. It's called DialogDesign.dk. I believe the link will be available after this talk.
Yes.
And look especially under the one that says Molich Says. There's all kinds of less interesting stuff there, like my CV and all the courses and trainings that I do. But you will find, for example, one about usability humor. And usability humor includes one example that I like to present when I do talks to functional testers, with a user who's struggling with the system to find the right password. So he tries one attempt, the system says it's too short. He makes another attempt with a longer password. The system says it must start with there must be a capital letter in it. The user includes 2 capital letters and the system says, no, just 1 capital letter. And so it goes on for about 8 cycles. You can read the full example. It's not so useful here for reading it aloud. You can find it on my website under usability humor. By the way, I think what I consider humor probably tells you quite a bit about me. I believe that if you really want to know a person, you've got to understand, you've got to know what that person's sense of humor is. So if you like that on my website, you'll probably like me. If you don't like it, you may not like my other products.
Have you had a chance to run a usability test on your website, DialogDesign?
Don't ask me about that. I must be very honest and say, no, not yet. I have done something else. But it's not as good as a usability test. I've asked some colleagues to do a usability inspection of it, which is not the same as a usability test. In a usability inspection, you go in and, so to speak, inspect the website. You go through it and make comments of everything that comes to your mind regarding usability. And actually, if anyone wants to do me a service, go to my website. If there's something that displeases you, that you don't like, send me a note. I love getting emails.
And
so
you will,
send me an email. And
you will fix or just receive an email?
I will respond to it. That's all I can promise. Because the website is a little bit of my soul. And if people try to change my soul, I might just resist a little bit. By the way, which brings me to a very important point. Usability people should not just be naysayers. They should not just complain. They should also speak out when something works well. So we should not only criticize, we should also praise. I don't know if you're familiar with Mary Poppins, the figure from the figure from the story of the same name, Mary Poppins. And Mary Poppins has a song that says, with a spoonful of sugar, the medicine goes down. So if you have bad news for your programmers, for your colleagues, make sure that you also have a little bit of praise. So that's reason number 1 for having positive comments in your usability test report and in your inspections. The second reason is it would be a real disaster if the programmers, if the development team took something out of the website that users really like, just because no one had bothered to tell them, oh, users really like that.
Okay, I think now we know you much better. You are not a simple guy. I would say you are a tricky guy. You say if you find a problem on my website, please send me a description, and I will definitely reply to you. But you are not going to promise that you will fix. Now I know.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. The tricky
Very
approach.
Thank you for such a soft advertising. I'd like to ask, what do you think, what plays the major role in creating websites? Regarding to design.
Well, first, if you mean to create a usable website, because all the other things, there's a lot of technical stuff involved and a lot of coding and so on. And even though I am by education a software engineer, I haven't coded for many, many, many years. But from a usability viewpoint, I would say the first thing is to find out what is the purpose. What is it that you want to accomplish with a website? What do the users really want? Not what does the marketing department want from it. What do the users really want? And you can find out that by getting out of your office, talking to the users. You can't do that from your office chair. So you will have to get out of the office, talk to some users, and I can promise you it's very fun. It's very entertaining. I like it a lot to talk to users. Then get back, make a prototype, sketch a prototype, even on paper. That's step number 2. Step number 3, show it to some users. Ideally, have a task. Like, assume it's a restaurant reservation system, ask them to reserve a table. If it's a car rental website, ask them to rent a car. Step number 4 is be prepared for some real surprises. As one of my friends put it, the users will tell you how wrong you were. And then go back, refine the prototype. And again, my colleague says it never ends. But of course it does. It ends when it's good enough. It will never be perfect. If you strive for the perfect, you will never be finished. So you need to have some requirements, and as soon as these requirements for the good but not the perfect, as soon as they're met, you're done. And you can do that. You can get quite far with paper prototyping. You don't have to code. You don't have to code a lot. You can get quite far with paper prototyping. And one idea that I'm particularly advocating these days is have competing prototypes. Let 2 teams, 2 small teams, or even 3 teams, 4 teams, let them develop parallel prototype. Have a healthy competition. And then get the best ideas from these prototypes together, create 2 new prototypes, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. And did you ask your users before creating your website?
Excuse me?
Did you did you ask your users before creating your own website? If you have to start from this step.
Good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And the embarrassing answer is no, I didn't. I did have some tasks. No, maybe I should make it clear. The purpose of my website is to describe my works and my thought, which means that user requirements in this particular case are not so important. But yeah, yes, you're right. I'm not following my own ideas. At least not as much as I should with my own website.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yes, quite honest answer. Okay, Rolf. A lot of people trying to explain the difference between usability and user experience. I already heard 2 options. One was quite pragmatical, and one was quite emotional. Can you draw the line between usability and user experience?
Well, one of the things that I'm doing is that I'm training people in a basic, we're giving people a kind of basic UX training. And for that purpose, we have written a curriculum, which is freely available on the website. I've even taught courses about that in Ukraine. And one of the things we do in that course is to explain usability and user experience and the difference between these two concepts. Now, there is a almost universally accepted definition of usability. And that's the one that I gave you just a moment ago. Usability is effectiveness plus efficiency plus satisfaction. Unfortunately, there's no similar agreement about what user experience is. In our curriculum, we say user experience, I can't remember the exact definition, it's rather long and wordy, but it's something about it's a total experience that the user has when in his or her encounter with the organization. So let me give you an example. For a car rental website, for instance, the first thing might be that the user notices a billboard which advertises the car rental company. That's the first place where the user has a so-called touch point with the company. Then he might call the company to get some assistance in connection with the reservation. Again, that's part of the user experience. Is the support person friendly? Does he or she know what they're talking about? And so on and so forth. The next step might be that they actually go to the website to rent the car. Now that's the first time when usability, both usability and user experience, come into play. The experience that they have on the screen, on the website, when they rent a car, is both usability and user experience. After that, they will probably go to some location to pick up the car. Again, that's user experience. It doesn't have very much to do with usability. They drive the car, maybe they have to call support, maybe they use the instruction manual for the car, and so on. They give back the car, they turn in the car after they're finished, and maybe they get some emails from the car rental company. I usually do that after having rented a car. I get lots of interesting and annoying offers. That's also part of the user experience. So our definition is usability. That's what happens in front of the screen. When you sit in front of the screen, when you work directly with a product. Usability is also everything that happens before you work with the product and after you work with the product. And one of the trends that I see in our field is that usability professionals are working more and more with the user experience, because it doesn't help that you have a wonderful experience renting the car when the car turns out to be dirty when you arrive to pick it up, or when you return the car, there's no one to help you, or they are not very polite when you give back the car, and so on and so forth. So the total user experience is built up of all of these small pieces, and all of these touch points between the user and the organization need to be considered and need to be good for the total user experience to be good. That's a lot of words. I hope it made sense.
I also hope, yes. But at the same time...
Otherwise, on my website, I have a nice diagram. There's actually, under Molich says, I have said a few things about usability and user experience. And there's a nice diagram and an example, a real example from a flower shop that explains the difference between these two concepts, the similarities and the difference between these two concepts.
Okay.
If I should say one more word, remember that usability had a satisfaction component. Usability was effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. User experience is mostly concerned with the satisfaction part of usability.
Okay, can I ask you one more question and request a small clarification? One of them in one of our previous interviews with it was James Dodkins, customer experience specialist. He mentioned that customer experience is mostly, not mostly, but more related to the emotions person experience during the usage of the product, during the communication with the company, during the working with the manufacturer. So usability, it's something very pragmatical. How efficient, efficiency, and things like you already mentioned it. But the customer experience is more emotional. And he gave us an interesting example about the king of the user experience, Elon Musk. I would say the great user experience. It's about the Tesla, and it's like a meme already. And hashtag, it's amazing. It's magic. Yes, this is about user customer experience. But when we are talking about usability, it's like everything is on place. You are sitting comfortable. You have nice driving experience and things like that. Can we say that this is also correct?
Yes. Like I said a moment ago, there are many different definitions of user experience and customer experience. And I was fearing that you would ask me about the difference between customer experience and user experience. And then I would have said, I don't know. I don't know what that is.
So I
But
shouldn't ask.
what you said actually makes perfect sense to me. I don't think it conflicts with that. And remember, always remember, the usability, the definition of usability has a satisfaction component. Satisfaction, pleasure, the pleasure of use is also a part of usability.
The joy of using.
The joy, the pleasure of using a system.
Joy of paying and joy of using.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And thank you. I'd like to back to the website creation, to design creation. And I have a question. In one of your interviews, you said that you hope that one day there will be a library of generalized and structurized building blocks to create a design that has been truly tested on the real audience and has been proved by its use. So I have a question. Are we getting close to this idea now? Are we far from that? From having this library of building blocks?
I think we're pretty close to it. One of my colleagues, Dan Rosenberg, just sent out a book that's called UX Magic, which I recommend. And he proposes that we should design new products, not just websites, but also apps, mainly by using existing patterns from pattern libraries. What you call building blocks is probably what I call patterns. Well-tested UX components. And you actually see that if you go to a shopping website, they have probably not created the checkout sequence from scratch. I would say that would be very inefficient. They probably taken some standard pattern or some standard module and adapted it to their purposes. And the same, you see the same. I've just been shopping around for wedding presents. One of my sons is getting married shortly. So I was buying all kinds of linen and pillows and cushions and so on. And I was amazed to see how good these search engines were that filtered out just the right thing for me, and how similar they were across websites. And that's something that users really like. That's a similarity, that they don't have to learn new concepts when they go from one website to another. So I think that to some extent, these building blocks are already here. And we make use of them when we make standard websites like shopping websites. There's still a lot of room for making individual changes to these, branding these websites in accordance with the colors and the graphics that a certain company wants to have.
Thank you, and congratulations to your son for his wedding. And I'd like to ask also about trends in design. Where will it go? Yes, we use libraries. We have already some, you said, patterns. And what about trends?
That's hard to see. Yeah. We see some interesting trends in voice user interfaces, if that's what you are after. We see gesture interfaces. What worries me is that every time I get in touch with one of these voice interfaces, I have problems communicating with them. They don't always understand what it is that I want to say. And they're not good enough at using some of the repair mechanisms that human beings have when a conversation goes wrong. Now, if you and I have a problem in a conversation, we have repair mechanisms, like I can see a puzzled expression on your face, not right now, of course, but just as an example. And then I will, of course, immediately consider, what was it that I said that went wrong? But with a computer system, they are often not very human in that respect. Otherwise, I would say the devil lies in the detail. And designs are getting better and better because all the details are improving. Sometimes when I use certain websites, I can see that there have been usability people around on these websites, because all of the questions that I have, all of the questions that I might want to ask, micro questions, they're answered right away. And then again, there are other websites where it's almost impossible to figure out anything, even though the design is very nice and beautiful. So that might be a trend, but it's in the detail, that there is more attention to the detail in the really good websites.
Thank you. It's a very good answer. I was thinking that it's only my problem that my Siri doesn't understand me, but actually it's everywhere. I absolutely agree that maybe it's trend, but it's really not there yet.
That's true. That's my experience too. I don't have Siri, I have Alexa, and it's pretty good at understanding what it is that goes, what it is that I want to say. But if I use a word and expression that it is not prepared for, it doesn't really, it is not really helpful anymore. I have a video that I'll show sometime with a little girl who wants to play one of these shark songs, Baby Shark, I think it's called. And she asks Alexa to play Baby Shark for her. And Alexa doesn't understand the request. She tries many times, but Alexa just says, I don't understand what it is that you are saying, or misinterprets it completely. And finally, the mother comes in, who speaks, of course, a little clearer English than her toddler does, and starts playing Baby Shark. and the little girl does some very nice dancing steps and so on. So it's so cute, but it also tells a good story about what happens if you don't have repair mechanisms. Google has a very good repair mechanism. Well, at least sometimes. If you enter something that Google doesn't completely understand, it comes up, did you mean? And then it suggests something which in 70 to 80% of the cases is actually quite a good suggestion. It does not say, you stupid fool, you just made an input error. But it just says very politely, did you mean so and so, which is what a human being would do.
Absolutely agree. Thank you.
Rolf, I just would like to clarify. The girl asked Alexa, or Alexa asked girl?
No, the girl asked Alexa.
But not Alexa. Okay. I just thought that Alexa asked girl.
Oh, no. No. The girl wanted to dance, so she asked Alexa for some music.
Okay. And just to make sure, you just mentioned that your son is going to marry. Have you had a hard talk with him eye to eye before doing such a mistake? Oh, sorry, act.
No, I haven't. He has been in Denmark. We have a tradition that the man is going down on his knees, asking the girl please to marry him. And after that moment, which he did not agree with me in advance, I think nothing is going to stop him from marrying that girl. So having a man-to-man or father-to-son talk with him would probably not help. Probably not have been very helpful. You know, these young people, these young boys today, they are pretty self-determined, and I actually appreciate that. They are not going to listen a lot to their father.
That's probably good. Take responsibility. Okay,
exactly.
Let's try to speak about usability, but I just wanted to make sure that you've done everything. So okay. It's a simple question. Some people say that usability is just about the common sense. Can you comment?
Well, it is. It's very true. It is about common sense. But even common sense needs some help a little bit. And you get that common sense, for instance, by inviting a user. The user will try to solve these tasks. And that is one of the things that I really like about this profession. That's sitting with the user, and suddenly the user say, why is that button labeled so-and-so? And I almost say, oh, yes, of course. How stupid of me that I hadn't realized it myself. And then in the next moment, I smile and say, good that we had some users to tell us about ordinary common sense. Because sometimes we get so engulfed in our own problems that we forget who the real users are. And we forget that they, even though they are very, very reasonable people, they might, for example, not speak the same language as we do. So sometimes I talk about mental models to users, and that's a concept that I use a lot when I talk to my UX colleagues, forgetting that ordinary users don't understand what that is. And that happens a lot. This is one of the basic rules, one of the heuristics, you might call it, of usability is speak the user's language. That, you might say, that is common sense. And I totally agree with you. If you take the 10 heuristics that Jacob Nielsen has made, or the 10 heuristics that I made originally in 1990, they can all be classified as common sense. Provide feedback, for instance, that's another of these heuristics. Tell the user what's going on. That's common sense. Yet it is often being violated, and this common sense, we need assistance from our users to get the common sense back into our dialogues.
It's a good question. You say that usability it's about the common sense. Okay, but in the same time we have a lot of really unusable the websites, and sometimes, for example, user journey is so tricky that user even can't complete it. So my question probably a little bit philosophical, but in the same time, why we reinvent the bicycle again, and again instead of use common sense? Any ideas?
That's a very good point. And that is why we should rely more on standing of the shoulders of our colleagues. Instead of reinventing the bicycle, I usually say instead of reinventing the wheel, we might use all the experience that we have from previous websites. So instead of saying, I want to build something from the ground, rely on patterns, rely on things that we know works, even though it means that your product will not be distinguish itself very clearly from other products, because it will end. Often usable products are quite dull because users say, hey, it's not very good, but it's easy to use. I usually compare it to saying it's not always the most fancy or beautiful girl that you want to marry. It's the traditional, stable, steady girl that you want to marry.
Okay. Can you say about the efficiency of the girl?
No, I don't want to go too far with that analogy.
Okay.
And I'd like to back to heuristics.
Maybe we should take the question from. I'm not sure. There's one question that's come up from the audience, just to make sure that we are actually caring a little bit about our users.
Yes, definitely. But I think you have already answered this question. But at the same time, I will just read. Are you expect any significant changes in the usability field in the future years, or everything will remain pretty much the same as we had 20 years ago and now?
I think the answer to that is that there is a slow evolution going on. There's no revolution, there's no revolutionary method, even though some people claim that they have invented usability, revolutionary methods. But we do see a trend of things trickling up, and there's a kind of a Darwinistic development going on in that some of the things work and they stay. For instance, about 5 years ago, I had not heard of the concept of user journey maps. And today, everybody is talking about user journey maps because they are very, very helpful in communicating with users and, more importantly, with management. They speak the language of management. We've had managers who said, yeah, I understand that. The concept of a user journey map and a touch point, that is very important. So some of my colleagues have workshops with top management where they actually sit and work on user journey maps. And top management considers that very interesting. So it's a good way of selling usability. I also see a trend towards more and more interest in UX strategy and UX management. Again, there were some great articles published about 20 years ago about that in that field. But in recent years, I'm going to a conference here in about 2 days, a virtual conference, of course, and there is about 5 or 6 different presentations on UX strategy and UX maturity. And that is also a field that is interesting me quite a bit, helping people who are on a low level of maturity to advance the acceptance of UX and usability in their company.
Okay.
So the answer is there is no great revolution like there was many years ago when we started doing usability testing. But there is a lot of There are lots of good things. Another thing I might mention is that the books that are out there, at least some of the books about usability that come out, they keep getting better and better. They keep getting more and more usable. And you can talk about the usability of a book, for instance. Does it have an index? And if there's an index, is it possible to find the things that I'm looking for? Are there illustrations? Are there examples? And so on and so forth. Yes, please.
Thanks.
Thank you. I want to still ask my question about, you were talking about heuristics, and I have a question. Did you consider updating heuristic model for today? Of course, there will be not great change, but maybe it needs some fresh air. What do you think?
That's actually a very good point. Now, you were kind enough to send me that question ahead of this interview. And I hadn't actually considered that. I do have on my new website, I do have an overview of the original set of heuristics from 1990, Jacob Nielsen's set from 1994, and the ISO dialogue principles, which although they're called dialogue principles, they're really heuristics too. All of these heuristics have usability problems. They're difficult to understand. They look simple, but they are quite difficult to understand. That's at least when I'm training people, I have problems making people understand what these heuristics really mean. For instance, one of the heuristics is called match between the system and the real world. Now, like one of my colleagues says, and he's a very experienced UX professional, he says, what on earth does that mean? How can you expect a newcomer to understand all the implications of that? And I analyzed it, and I found that there are at least 3 different, more atomic heuristics buried in that. But I will definitely consider. Thank you very much for raising that question. And keep looking on my website or send me an email. So I have your email address, and then I will send you a notification when I've come up with the Molich's view of what the heuristic should be like. But of course, that wouldn't work because I need to involve all the other UX professionals. Because if I just came up with my own heuristics, people would say, yeah, that's Rolf's opinion. What is that worth? So I would really need to work with some good colleagues. And there are, believe me, there are lots of heuristics around. I would say I could probably mention the first 5 or 6 sets of heuristics that are developed by different people. The one interesting thing is that the set that Jacob Nielsen made in 1994 is by far the one that's quoted by most people. So that seems to have stuck. There must be something about it that is better. And I actually think, I think these heuristics are quite good. And Jacob is working on these. If you look at his website, he's adding examples, practical examples of how these principles work in practice. And I think that's, for a good set of heuristic, you need to write them in the user's language. You need to provide examples. You need to ensure that there are not too many. Because if there are too many, they become unmanageable.
Thank you.
Rolf, let's say we are working in the agile environment. Agile, but not fragile. Agile environment, very flexible. Without, the agile. It's the main feature of the agile. It's there are no requirements. Just
right.
Agile. This means
so. Yes.
People often say we don't have time to wait for user results or run an interviews and usability tests. Can you advise something? But please don't advise just throw everything away and stop.
No, it's a reality, and of course we need to be pragmatic. If these are the conditions, then usability people have to adapt to that. And I would say, first of all, make it clear to the product owner that if there's no upfront contextual analysis, as we call it, no initial user research, no interviews, then they run a substantial risk that their product might fail in the marketplace because they are designing the wrong product. If they're willing to accept that risk, then go ahead. Anyway, user research, contextual analysis can continue in parallel with the first development activities. It's just that maybe after a few sprints, they will realize that they have gone off on the right track, on the wrong track, when the results from the user research start coming in. And it doesn't take several weeks to run a few interviews. If you contract with me, for instance, and you give me an assignment within a week, I could probably have some results. They would not be perfect. But as I sometimes say, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So they could be good enough for getting at least some feeling of what the users were like. With respect to usability testing, what I usually recommend is that for a project of a reasonable size, you schedule weekly usability tests, like every Tuesday, for instance. And you recruit users. You hopefully know who the target user group is. So you recruit 4, 5, 6 users, and you ask them to come in. And on Monday evening, you sit down with the product team, with the development team, and figure out what are we actually able to handle. So the usability test tasks are developed at a very late point in time. So you schedule, you have the whole set up, and you fill the meat, the real contents of the usability test come in at the very last moment. In that way, you can keep up with the sprints and have very fresh results to present to the team just a few days after they actually finished coding.
Can you confirm that following understanding is correct? You propose to, for example, implement in general some new feature and later ask your customers to express their opinions about how actually this new feature is working, correct? In a small iteration, no?
Not opinions. Usability test is very different from opinions. In a usability test, we ask people to solve a specific task. Sometimes the users will come up with opinions like saying, I think that button looks very nice, or I can easily figure out how to do this. We don't look at that. We don't take that very much into consideration. We look, you might say, very cold-heartedly, we look at, can they solve the task? And how long time does it take for them to solve the task? Of course, we do make a few notes. If they all say, oh, this website is really beautiful, we would make a note of that. But we distinguish very sharply between opinions on one side and basic facts, data about what the users can do and how quickly they can do it. So with the usability test, we always look at what can users accomplish, how quickly can they do it. Opinions are of less interest.
And what about emotions?
We usually measure emotions with user surveys. That's a great method for measuring emotions. You've got to be a little bit careful, because when you start talking about user surveys, you really need to have a base of 20, 30, 40 users before you're on a statistically safe grounds. With usability testing, it's rather different. It usually shows up within 5 tests or so, whether the users can figure it out at all, or whether it just runs like a breeze. And then there is no reason to do any more than that. But we usually, I usually try to make a point of that. Usability tests are for gathering data Opinions are okay. I have no objections to opinions. They're very important. User satisfaction is important. But we leave that to questionnaires, where we might ask, where we might come up with statements like, the user interface is pretty. We might say the error messages were helpful. The text is understandable and clear, and we would ask users to rate each of these statements on a scale from, for example, 1 to 5, where 1 says totally disagree and 5 says completely agree. So we have several instruments at our disposal for evaluation: usability testing for getting the data, and user surveys for getting the opinions.
Okay.
I also have some questions, but it's mostly lifestyle questions. Yes, I'd like to ask about the design too. I'm wondering, what are you interested now? What are you interested in? Where are you moving after all your achievements in the field of design?
What I have done over the years is I started out that I became mostly known for my work on the heuristics back in 1990. Then I moved into something that's called comparative usability evaluation studies, because there were some rumors that usability tests were the gold standard for solving, for finding the answer to any question about usability. And I said, I'm not sure about that. So I set out to find out, are usability results reproducible? And we ran a whole series of studies. The latest study, CUE10, was just published a few days ago in the so-called Journal of Usability Studies, where we studied usability test moderation. So for a long while, my interest was in studying usability testing in great detail. Today, my interests are in certification, training people who are not very familiar, who are interested in usability, but who do not know a lot about it, about the basics of usability, and also training people in usability testing, which is what we call an advanced level training with an advanced level certification. Because I strongly believe that after a course, you should have a kind of an exam. And today, many people are familiar with the concept of certification, because requirements engineers are being certified, functional testers are being certified, and you name it. So usability also has certification programs these days. And the final thing I'm interested in at the moment is UX strategy, UX maturity. How do you measure the UX maturity of a certain organization? And most importantly, how do you help? What specific steps can you advise a company to take if they're interested in improving their UX maturity, their UX abilities, their UX skills?
Thanks. And what about challenges? What kind of challenges are you looking for today?
Well, I think all of these present challenges. Our biggest challenge right now, one of the challenges we have, is to convince people that usability certification is actually worthwhile. So people come to us and say, hey, I paid, say, 1,000 euros for a training course and a certificate. Will this help me get a better job? And we say we're not sure. Fortunately, we see a lot of companies who are saying we need to ensure, as companies grow more mature, they of course trust their UXers to come up with really important advice. And they say to us, we need to make sure that these UXers are providing us with good advice. We need to make sure that they know the tools of the trade and that they use these tools correctly. Now, certification is not a guarantee that they will do it correct, but at least it increases the probability that they will not, sorry about that, fuck up everything completely. The other challenge about UX strategy is, of course, convincing people who have been in the field for 35 years and think that they know the customers, that maybe they don't know the customers so well after all. That's one of the, in addition to the one, is usability just common sense? The other objection we hear, I have been in this field for 35 years. I know our customers. How long have you been here? And when the UX professional says, I've been here for 9 months, and says, see, that's a proof. You don't know about our customers. That's why you're talking about all this UX stuff. And then my recipe in that situation, which sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, is run a usability test to demonstrate what does a usability problem look like. We have a method for finding usability problems and correcting them before they hit the marketplace.
Right. Thank you. Thanks.
By the way, I have already noted your fuck up everything completely. Great. just okay. I have a question about the money. In some point in time when you're talking about usability testing and, for example, about your services, it's not about you, just about the usability expert that trying to sell the services. It always a discussion about the budget. And
yes.
the people are going to pay the money for the usability test, for the consultancy and things like that, are always asking, when this money will return to me? So how can you convince, for example, the managers or decision makers to invest in usability? How can you talk in the money language? For example, you invest in the usability and then you will receive twice more or 10 times more. Is it really possible?
Well, it's difficult. It is possible, but it's going to take a long time. You will have to do continuous measurement to see how certain response times, how certain task times improve over time. Managers operate with a concept that's called KPI, Key Performance Indicators. Now, if we want to speak the language of the managers, and of course we want to speak the language of our users, if we want to speak the language of our users, the managers, we need to set up KPIs that we can measure. Now, a KPI could be, for instance, how long time does it take, on average, for a user to rent a standard car from Frankfurt Airport on our website? We can measure that. We're going to see some users who do it in 90 seconds. We're going to see other users who use 8 minutes to do that. But if we test with sufficiently many users, we can use statistical methods to set up so-called confidence intervals and find a figure for how much it takes on the average for a user to do that. Then the UX people can start doing their magic, and hopefully the KPI will go down. That does not necessarily mean that profits will increase. I don't know how to show that. There are some people, my colleague Randolph Bias and Debbie Mayhew have written a book about cost-justifying usability. I'm not a great fan of that book because all their cases are, in my opinion, far from the reality that I experience in my everyday life. It's something like you can buy normal milk and you can buy milk that's, what's it called? Green milk? Ecological?
Yes, twice more expensive.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And Can you measure? Can you measure in any way that the other milk, the green milk, so to speak, that is better? That you get what's cost benefit analysis of that? That's very difficult.
No, you
So
just need
you
to look
have
at the
to have-
price. You just
Yeah.
need to look at the price and everything become clear.
Yes.
You're
That's true.
you're drinking this milk and you're just enjoying. So green. If
Yes.
it's just simple milk you are drinking and just what the
Yeah. But it's a little bit the same with usability. One thing that has really surprised me is that some of the very, very good examples we have on usable websites have not meant more for usability. Like when I go out and do a usability test and we have search, people often use the search engine to find something on the website, and often the results are bad or even very bad. The most frequent comment that I hear from users in that respect is, why don't they just do like Google? So there's also, in addition to the question about the bottom line, showing that you earn more, that you get a greater profit with usability, there's also, of course, the risk of falling behind. If you don't invest in usability, you might fall behind. But I don't have I don't have a snap proof that says, oh, invest $10,000 in usability using Molich's method, and we guarantee that you will get at least $20,000 out of it. I can't do that. I would never take a contract for that. Most of the customers that I have believe that it's important to put the customer in the center. And I actually had one client recently who got scared because they had competitors and independent magazines were doing reviews of the usability of their products and some competing products. And the magazines were consistently pointing out one of the competitors and saying, you might want to consider that product because it has a usability that's much better than my clients, the usability of my clients' products. Unfortunately, even that was not enough for the client to say, yes, of course, we're going to do it. They just said, well, yeah, maybe we will. Maybe it's something else that makes a difference.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have two more questions. One of them is about your part of life that we can call teaching. In 2013, you became a best teacher of the Copenhagen University. And am I right?
Quite. A small correction. I was teaching for the Department of Computer Science, and I became their teacher of the year. It was not. I did not get as far as becoming the teacher of the year for the whole University of Copenhagen.
Okay. Yeah.
But go ahead, please, with your question.
Yeah. So, okay, teacher of the year of the computer science at the University of Copenhagen. And I'd like to ask you about your teaching approach. What is the best teaching approach for you?
First of all, the reason why I was so happy about getting that prize was that I got it from my users. I was told afterwards, it's of course a little bit of a secret what they do in these committees, but the committee that nominated me, I was told the students insisted that I should have that prize. And I think it is because I try to teach a user-centered style. That is, a student who sends a question to me gets an immediate answer. During my lectures, the lecture notes are available before the lecture starts. So the students who want to do that can download the lecture notes on their computer, make notes directly in the PDF file if they want to do so. The other thing is that I use interactive quizzes. So every 10 minutes, for instance, my lecture would be interrupted by a quiz where the students would take their smartphone and vote on a question that was displayed on a PowerPoint slide, and afterwards PowerPoint, via some very smart module, would then display the vote results. And I would get feedback of how good my teaching had been, and the students would see, oh, I got that right, or I got that wrong, and I got that right, and almost no one else got that right. So I think these were the three basic elements: doing a lot of customer service, a lot of user service. For instance, when they had their final assignments, I knew that on the first day of the final assignment, there were about 250 students in these classes. So on the first day of these assignments, when they had gotten their assignments, I knew that they would all bombard me with questions. So I blocked the whole day in my calendar saying, I will only answer questions from students this day. And the first questions, of course, took quite some time to answer. But then I created a small library of these questions. And towards the middle of the day, I could say, read answer number 45 or read answer number 11, because some other person has already asked us. And towards the end of the day, it turned out that there were not very many repeating questions, and the students said afterwards, oh, it was just great that we could also see what the other students had asked and what you had answered, because we didn't even know that it was allowed to ask that question. So I think great customer service and kind of an entertaining lecture. My students told me afterwards that I had a dry sense of humor. So I was not using jokes all the time, but I was engaged, and every now and then there was just a little bit of twinkle in my eyes, and they appreciated that. So I think that was but usability, now that you ask about it, usability is certainly very important in training and education.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds great. And I have a last question. Can I ask? Yes. Since we are talking about teaching, could you please provide a piece of advice to a new generation of designers?
Please say that again.
I'd like to ask you for advice, piece of advice for a new generation of designers.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm sorry, but I will have to do a little bit of advertisement here. I would recommend that they look at our certification program. It's called UXQB, User Experience Qualification Board, and the certificates are called CPUX. They don't have to, it's Certified Professional for User Experience. Otherwise, I think you would be surprised at the simplicity and very primitive advice that you offer, that I have to offer. But I would actually say that designers should concentrate on the 10 heuristics that we have known now for about 30 years. Again and again, I see websites that have problems, beautiful websites that have problems because they don't speak the user's language, they don't provide feedback, and perhaps most importantly, when something goes wrong, and I'm not saying if something goes wrong, I'm saying when something goes wrong, they provide bad error messages. So the one single advice I have, and you may laugh at that and say it's very primitive and so on, is make sure that you write your error messages well before the system is shipped, that you have them reviewed. And remember the golden rules for error messages, which are that they should be constructive, tell the user what to do. They should be precise and not just say, here's a list of 6 things that might have gone wrong. Try to figure out which of them actually happened here. And finally, they should be polite. Imagine that the user was standing in front of you. Would you dare to speak the content of your error message to the user? I suppose you would never say to me, if you didn't understand what I was saying, you wouldn't say, illegal output, Rolf.
No, I would know. Thank you. Thank you for the advice.
I think we don't have any more questions, right?
I don't. Do you?
No, I don't. And I would say thank you, Rolf, for this such a funny interview with a lot of really hard jokes, and for the noted fuck up everything just perfect. It's yes, I probably should know this and really use it in a hard manner. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. We really enjoyed the interview. I hope you also had a fun time together with me and Miriam. So probably Miriam would say something. Yes.
Sure. Yes, I'd like to thank you as well, and thank you to having us and for such an interesting conversation. I'm sure it will be very useful for your audience and for many designers who will watch our video on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And if you will allow a final semi-commercial message,
yes.
Go to my website, DialogDesign.dk. You will find many of the things, not all of them, but many of the things explained perhaps in some more detail and explained in writing on the website. But thank you very much for inviting me. It has been a pleasure.
Also, please mention that tomorrow we are going to run an email distribution, and we definitely include all info you mention it, so people can visit your site and write you an email, and you will reply, things like that. It was really a pleasure.
If I get 1,000 emails, I can't promise that I will reply within 1 hour, but I will reply.
Okay.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.